a serial killer named Robert Berdella. Robert Berdella definitely used some very interesting kind of torture methods, if you will. I haven't researched much into torture methods or anything like that, so this is kind of a new experience of learning about this for me. So it was definitely a little strange and confusing to read. Um, the things he chooses to do are kind of concerning. Not even kind of concerning, they're very concerning. But anyways, let's just get into it. All right. Robert Berdella was born January 31st, 1948. Robert was a serial killer who murdered young men around Kansas City, Missouri. He was known as the Kansas City Butcherer and also the Collector. See, the Collector was a name he decided to use because he had watched a movie, The Collector, which is basically about a man who stalks young women and then kidnaps them and, something like that. Robert was the older of two brothers. Robert never got out of the house because he had no friends. Robert's father, Robert Sr., saw Robert as a failure because of his lack of interest in sports. He would often compare Robert to his younger brother, who enjoyed sports. Robert Sr. would often abuse the boys with a leather strap. Now, we were talking about leather strap, like a leather luggage strap, in the last video about Jerry Brunos. There's a lot of connections that I've made. They're not even like really big connections, it's just similarities between serial killers and all this stuff like that. It's like, really, how does this connect? In Robert Jr.'s teens, he realized he was a homosexual, and also started to become more aggressive, mostly towards women. After Berdella's father had eventually died, his mother remarried, which caused Robert to fall further into his activities that caused him to socialize less with the people around him, such as writing to his pen pals in different countries. Which, the sound of it doesn't sound like it's that bad, that limiting, but apparently in this year, this era, it's seen as him not socializing, even though he was. Anyways, after Robert had graduated high school, he decided to go to college, which he was able to do because of his excellent grades. During college, he joined a group of people who supplied him with drugs. He also sold other people the drugs he got from his new friends. He began abusing alcohol. He had engaged in animal torture on two reported events. He had decapitated a duck near his piers and used tranquilizers and sedatives on a dog. Robert Berdella owned a house on Charlotte Street. The address is 4315. This house was basically used as a house to, hold people there. Not like kidnapping or anything like that. He would help, troubled teens who are running away. He would help male prostitutes and drug addicts, giving them a place to stay if they needed to. At the time, before he went super crazy, he was pretty nice. Still really closed off, but he helped those who needed it. But in this house, he would make the men he kept there, or housed there, um, engage in sexual acts so that way they could stay there rent-free. So, he was nice, but to a degree. Robert Berdella, also at the time he owned this house and housed a bunch of these drug addicts and stuff, had joined a crime prevention society and eventually became the chairman. He then left the group in the mid-1980s, so he actually did stay there for a good long time. I don't remember the exact year he joined, but they stay there for a while. He was on a neighborhood watch. He was pretty involved in trying to make sure the community stayed, together. Nothing happened, nothing was wrong. Robert had rented a spot at a local flea market so he could sell antiques he had collected over many years. Also, collecting antiques was also one of his activities that caused him to sink deeper into his not talking to people phase. Alright. He started talking to a man who owned a booth near him. Robert also talked to the man's son, Jerry Howell. At first, Jerry and his peers had taunted Robert for being gay, but eventually confided in him that they would engage in prostitution to get money. The two had become friends, Robert and Jerry. Robert had offered to help Jerry if he had any problems with the law, because that's the kind of person Robert was at the time, a very helpful guy, at least towards society and outwards people. In the summer of 1984, Jerry had turned 19. All right, that was a quick little background to Robert, and his stuff wasn't too crazy. I have researched another man. I'm going to talk about him in my next video, and his stuff was a lot crazier in the beginning. Robert's wasn't that, insane or mind blowing. Just kind of regular antisocial stuff that's definitely going to lead him to become a serial killer, like tranquilizing dogs. Anyways, now we're going to get into Robert Berdella's victims. Alright, the angle of the camera might have changed. That's because my entire setup fell down. But we're going to get into Robert Berdella's victims. Alright, Robert's first victim was Jerry Howell, the son of the man who owned the booth across to him. Robert said he would drive Jerry to a dance contest in Merriam, Kansas. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. While they were in the car, Robert had drugged him with diazepam. Diazepam. I did not research how to pronounce any of these words, so that's what I'm going to say. Diazepam and acepromazine, and got him drunk while they were on the road. He continued to drug Jerry until they arrived at Robert's house. Robert then injected Jerry with a heavy tranquilizer after he had passed out from all of the other drugs. Why? Like, this young boy, 19, already has so many drugs in his system from hours of just being drugged, and then he tranquilizes him? Anyways, Robert then carried Jerry to his bed and then tied him down. This is where things get gross. Jerry was left tied to Robert's bed for 28 hours. For these hours, he was repeatedly drugged, tortured, and violated by various objects. It was reported that Robert said the reason that Jerry had died was because he had choked on his own vomit, or died because of all the drugs that were in his system. Robert said he had tried to perform chest compressions to revive Jerry, but after that didn't work, he dragged Jerry's body into the basement, suspended his body over a large cooking pot. I don't know how big it is, but I assumed it must have been a very large cooking pot. Left many incisions on Jerry's inner elbows and jugular vein, and left his body draining overnight. The next day, he had dismembered Jerry's body with a chainsaw and knife, wrapped parts of his body in newspaper and trash bags, put those parts in more trash bags, and then left the bags out so that way they could come and get picked up by dump trucks later on that day to be taken to a landfill. It was stated that Robert Berdella had kept a little journal, basically a log of everything he would do to his victims, which I didn't see that he mentioned the log a lot, but it was mentioned that he wrote about basically every one of his victims in the log. Robert also stated that he didn't kill Jerry for his own satisfaction, but for his psychological and mental satisfaction. Okay. So that was his first victim. He was 19 years old. Alright, now let's get on to the next victim. On April 10th, a 20-year-old man named Robert Sheldon showed up at Robert Berdella's house and asked if he could live there for a bit. Sheldon paid his rent on time, but Berdella felt that Sheldon was an inconvenience. Berdella didn't feel any malice towards him. He didn't hate him or anything, but he felt that he could use Sheldon as someone to let out his anger. Robert drugged Sheldon and kept him for 3 days on the downstairs floor. Sheldon endured a lot of creative torture, which included pouring drain cleaner in his eyes, inserting needles under his fingertips, tying his wrists with wire so that way his nerve endings would be permanently damaged, and filling his ears with caulking. You know, caulking is the stuff where you put it on bathtubs and it's that kind of stuff. It's like some sort of cement glue mixture. On April 15th, a man came to Robert Berdella's house to do some scheduled maintenance. This caused Robert to suffocate Sheldon with a bag and then tied the bag up with a piece of rope. He then dissected Sheldon's body on the third floor. Alright, so that was his second victim. I believe he had maybe 5 victims, maybe 4. Which in that case means we're almost done. Alright. Next victim. In June, Robert found Mark Wallace, who he was an acquaintance with, living in his tool shed because there was a big storm and he just decided to live there. Robert invited him inside, because he's so nice, just a stand-up guy. And after noticing Mark's tense and depressive state, offered to inject him with drugs that could calm him down, because everybody needs friends like that. After about half an hour of Robert's insisting and pushing, Mark agreed to take the drugs. Berdella carried Mark down to the second floor bedroom. Mark was kept in the bedroom for almost a whole day. He was tortured with alligator clips, I'll put a picture of those up here, that were attached to his nipples so Robert could send electricity through his body. After a bit, Mark went unconscious. Robert had then begun to experiment with hypodermic needles by inserting them into Mark's back muscles. Mark died from a combination of drugs and a lack of oxygen. Mark Wallace died on June 23rd. So if anything, we could say that Mark Wallace showed up to Berdella's house on June 1st, stayed with him for a good while, and then on June 22nd, Berdella had kidnapped him. I guess he's living in his house. Kidnapped him, kept him in his basement, or on the second floor. Yeah, on the second floor. And then the next day he had died. So that's... Imagine that. Imagine living with the person who's going to eventually kill you. That's actually kind of scary. On September 26th, 1985, Berdella got a call from an acquaintance named James Ferris. James asked if he could stay with Berdella for a while, which Robert agreed to, with the intention of kidnapping James. So this time he knew what he was doing. He knew this was going to happen. With Mark Wallace, he did not intend to kill him, but for this man, James, he did intend. Berdella met James at a bar and took him to his house. Robert drugged him with tranquilizers, then tied him to his bed. James was tortured for 27 hours. James was tortured with 7,700 volts of electricity attached to his shoulders and testicles for up to 5 minutes multiple times. So there were segments of 5 minutes torture, 5 minutes torture, 5 minutes torture. That's insanely scary. Robert had also inserted hypodermic needles into James's neck and genitals. I did not really find out how James Ferris died, but I'm assuming it's very similar to the way the other ones have died, probably, with the drugs and tranquilizers. But we are now on to the next victim. His name is Todd Stoops. Alright. Todd was a friend who lived with Berdella on 2 different occasions. Robert hadn't seen Todd for a pretty long time, but then met up with him at a local park. Todd was a drug addict and a prostitute. When he talked to Berdella, he said he needed $13 for drugs. Robert said he would give him the money if he came back to his house and, did sexual things with him. Robert said he was very attached to Todd, and so he kept Todd in his house for 2 weeks. That is much more than he kept the other ones in for, because he was attracted to him. That's scary. Robert said his goal with Todd Stoops was to make him a cooperative and incapacitated sex slave. Robert had ran electricity through Todd's eyes in an attempt to blind him. He also poured drain cleaner down his throat to mute his screaming. During the second week of his capture, Robert had ruptured Todd's anal wall with his fist. Berdella had written in his log, the log again, that he had tried to feed Todd ice cream and soup, but he couldn't keep anything down, which is so sad. On July 1st, Todd died. I don't think I actually saw when Todd started living with him or got captured, but 2 weeks of just torture. That is scary. It was later determined that the ruptured anal wall caused septic shock, which was fatal. Alright, we have 2 more victims to talk about. This one's relatively quick. Berdella had met a man named Larry Peterson. Larry stayed with Berdella for a while. In the beginning, Berdella didn't intend on capturing Larry. One day, Berdella and Larry went out for a drive, which ended in Larry becoming drunk and injected with drugs. He then took Larry back down to his basement, where he bound Larry's hands up above his head, and poured drain cleaner down his throat. After a few weeks of his torture, Larry had finally begun to cooperate with Robert's requests, most likely out of fear. Right. So, one day, Larry had bit into Robert's penis and exclaimed that he could no longer take the abuse from Berdella. So, obviously, at that point, Larry was being, forced into that, so he bit into Robert and started yelling and screaming that he couldn't take it anymore. Well, Robert's reaction to that was not very kind. Robert then killed Larry by beating him with a tree branch. Right. After Larry was murdered, Robert took himself to the hospital for his injury. He then later dismembered Larry's body and put his head in a bag before burying it outside. Alright, the last victim of Robert Berdella was named Christopher Bryson. Bryson was subjected to the same torture as the other ones went through. Bryson was much more cooperative and was actually able to discuss the abuse he was enduring. But no negotiating was going to happen. So Bryson was very cooperative, and I read that they kind of had this level of, not necessarily friendship, but they were able to talk to each other, unlike Berdella's other victims. Bryson had asked him if he could change up the torture, not in a flaky way, but if he could stop torturing him maybe, and Berdella just flat out said no. Bryson was actually able to escape Robert Berdella's house because of how much Robert trusted him. What I was reading is that Berdella had kept Bryson tied up in these kind of ropes, and eventually, after a while, Berdella was able to trust Bryson to where Bryson asked if he could let him roam around for a few minutes of each day, and eventually Berdella decided that that could be an okay agreement. So for a while, Bryson was just walking around freely for a few minutes at a time, trying to gain trust, trying to make sure he didn't escape too quickly, because then that would get rid of any sort of other trust. This particular day, he had gotten the ropes taken off of him and actually jumped out of the second floor window of Berdella's house onto the street. It was said that he was running through the streets fully naked, running through the streets with nothing but a dog collar on, and he was yelling out for somebody to call the police. All right, that was the last victim, and eventually Bryson did find somebody to call the police, and everything got situated. I didn't read much about, going into the investigation or anything too, deep like what happened with Jerry Brunos. But yeah, all right. Robert Berdella had pled guilty to the murders and was sentenced to life in prison without possibility for parole. Berdella had died from a heart attack on October 8th, 1992. He was 43 years old. All right. Now they said he was 43 years old. That is extremely young to die, especially from a heart attack. But I'm not even looking at it like that because his victims were so much younger than what he died at. So, I feel Robert Berdella was definitely a very disgusting man, especially with the ways that he decided to torture these young men with drain cleaner and putting caulking in someone's eyes. That I only read that he put caulking in one of his victims' ears. Um, but it just seems very strange and different. I've never really heard of anything like that before. So, I think this video was probably a little quicker than last video. And that's okay, that's okay. But what I do have to say is that next video should be much, much longer. And I don't mean that in like, yay, it's longer. I mean that as it's longer. Because the next man I'm talking about is pretty scary. Pretty scary. All right, but that is all that I have to say for right now. That was Robert Berdella, a very disgusting man, and I will see you again in my next video. Bye.